Hello, and welcome to Trans Truth, the podcast dedicated to dispelling myths, fear, and ignorance about transgender people. Along the way, we'll be sharing items of interest to the transgender community, from political and news events to health, fashion, and beauty. And now, let's have a look at some news items that should be of interest to our listeners. In what is becoming a sadly familiar story, multiple sources, including ABC News on May 9th, have reported that Dr. Hussein Abdul Latif is concerned about the impact of a recently enacted Alabama law criminalizing gender-affirming care for trans people under the age of 19. Dr. Abdul Latif is the co-founder of a Birmingham clinic that treats 150 children with gender dysphoria. The other founder, Dr. Marissa Ladinsky, has said that she feels like she is walking a nightmare when describing the horrific impact of this ill-conceived law. As we will hear in our next story, virtually all recognized experts in the field of gender-affirming healthcare agree that the nationwide Republican strategy of attacking the care of young people suffering from gender dysphoria will have horrific consequences. As Dr. Ladinsky puts it, the first time ever that I can remember, at least for pediatricians, that we were literally forced to choose between the Hippocratic oath we took to do no harm and never abandon our patients versus the facing of a potential felony conviction. Let's let that sink in for a moment. Doctors are being told that they may face up to 10 years in prison for providing what they know to be the best care for their patients, care that they are honor-bound to provide. This, of course, has not deterred those who are relying on this political stunt to garner votes for conservative candidates. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall boasted that the science and common sense are on Alabama's side. Referring to the multiple lawsuits already brought against the state's misguided laws by families of affected children, he said, "We will win this fight to protect our children." In the face of an overwhelming professional outcry that this law will have quite the opposite effect, one wonders what exactly he believes it will protect the children from. A link to this story is in the notes for this episode. On May 2nd, 2022, Yale Law School announced the publication of a report that refutes the flawed science of Texas and Alabama laws criminalizing gender-affirming care. The report, produced by legal and medical experts from Yale Law School, the Yale School of Medicine's Child Study Center, and departments of psychiatry and pediatrics, and the University of Texas Southwestern, analyzes the many misleading claims that have been used to sell the recent legislative actions in Texas and Alabama legislatures. The report, now one of several by various scientific and professional organizations that denounce these actions, is said to be the first to address several of the false claims in a point-by-point rebuttal. From the linked article, those points are: Texas and Alabama officials have falsely claimed that doctors are routinely sterilizing children and teenagers with surgical procedures. The authors point out that the authoritative medical protocols for treating transgender young people and prepubertal children do not permit genital surgery before the age of majority. The Texas and Alabama actions consistently ignore the mainstream scientific evidence that documents the substantial benefits of gender-affirming care. The best scientific studies show that gender dysphoria is real and that gender-affirming care significantly improves mental health outcomes, including reducing rates of suicide. The Texas and Alabama actions greatly exaggerate the risks of gender-affirming drug therapy. Puberty blockers and hormonal treatments, which are used only in adolescents and not in prepubertal children, are safe and effective and are used only after a careful stage process of psychological and medical counseling. These therapies have long been approved by the major medical authorities. The Texas and Alabama authorities rely on poor quality evidence. The Texas Attorney General cites debunked and out-of-date studies and relies on an unvetted website created by political activists with little or no relevant scientific expertise. It is so tiresome and repetitive to point out that this latest nationwide boogeyman strategy of the GOP is only effective because of the fear and ignorance of their ill-informed base. And I'd let this one go, but for the fact that they have so callously calculated that it will fly, and with no regard for the impact it will have on thousands of trans kids and their families. I do not believe that the GOP leadership is ignorant of this. They just don't care about these people. It's the votes that matter. A link to this article in the notes for this episode. Hello again, and welcome to Trans Truth. I am your host, Kelly Nelson, she, her, hers, and I am joined, as always, by our co-host.
I'm Jerry Ann Young, she, her, hers.
And joining us today is Jen Pham from the Transgender Education Network of Texas. Jen, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Jen Pham. I use they, them pronouns. I am the Communications and Outreach Manager at the Transgender Education Network of Texas. If you want to know a little bit more about me, I am a queer and trans Vietnamese and American individual, born in Louisiana, raised in Texas. So very deep Southern ties, I would definitely say.
Like most of us here. I'm the one non-native here. Jen, tell us about the Transgender Education Network of Texas. Why do they exist, and what do you do?
Yeah, for sure. So the Transgender Education Network of Texas, and TENT for short, I know it's a little bit of a mouthful. We're mainly an organization. We're like a trans-led, policy-led organization. We're dedicated to furthering gender expansive and gender diverse equity and equality here in Texas. We mainly work around that mission by either educating and dispelling a lot of the misinformation around trans and gender expansive identity, either through workshops or education, or we're advocating at the Capitol and any local municipalities across Texas in terms of how we are able to exist and survive and thrive here in Texas.
It sounds like you were reading off the mission, values, and goals of Trans Truth. It just resonates. Our mission is very similar. Jerry Ann, you want to talk about that?
Yes, thank you. A major difference in us, Jen, is you advocate at the Capitol and up front and in person, and Kelly Nelson and I are subversives. We operate through the internet.
That's not to say that Jerry Ann hasn't had her share of time in Austin as well. She is an activist, maybe a reluctant activist, but she's out there doing it. Jen, I know what you're going to say right off the bat. I thought I knew, and then news broke earlier today. But I'd like you to talk about some of TENT's current or planned priorities and initiatives.
Yeah, for sure. There's been so much movement in the last 2 days, and specifically around, the Texas Supreme Court ruling over, Governor Abbott's directive. We're still strategizing and moving as a coalition with many of other organizations. You may have heard of their names, such as the ACLU or Equality Texas, Human Rights Campaign, Land Illegal, TILDEF, for the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, as well as, the Texas Freedom Network. And so, we're working literally around the clock the last few days and how we can be able to support, the transgender communities here in Texas, right? And in multiple different ways, right? And so, yes, that directive and that court ruling from the Supreme Court here in Texas was today. But, we're also talking about the current, ruling for what happened out in Dallas as well, right? The Dallas court ruled over the Children's Medical Center in terms of, how they may have impeded on a doctor's, professional medical duties, providing affirming care. Both of these, court cases are definitely extremely important as how we're seeing the, the situation, as well as just the way that we can advocate for trans lives here in the state of Texas. As, they're moving not only quite quickly, but also, from many different angles. And I can definitely talk a little bit more, about how we as a coalition here in Texas kind of operate in terms of trying to make sure that parents of trans kids, trans community members, as well as trans youth know that they're being supported, by hundreds, thousands of people that are doing this professionally, as well as, the tens and hundreds of thousands of people who are marching with us, showing up to rallies, and speaking out against the cruelty being placed against the trans communities, not only here, but also across the nation.
Yeah, we are certainly not the only state where this nationwide strategy of terrorizing trans youth and their families is being worked. So, setting aside the fast moving legal news for the moment, what are some of the priorities that Tent is working on? What is the long term, or what are the long term areas of focus for Tent?
Of course, yeah. I think that's a really good question, especially since, it's only been, just a little bit over 2 months. No, just over a month since, the Trans Day of Visibility, right? I think the Transgender Day of Visibility is kind of an amalgamation of everything that we've been working on in terms of like advocacy, but also in how we can combat any type of attacks of like anti-trans legislation, all the way to non-legislation, such as opinions or directives, right? And one huge part of it is understanding that, the long-term strategy is that this is going to be a marathon. Not only is it going to be a marathon in how we can, support trans community members, but also about how allies can support their trans siblings here in the state of Texas, right? And that's in many different ways, right? Through voting is definitely one huge thing. Every year we, see that, Texas is facing some of the most egregious forms of like voter suppression. But understanding that if we navigate that system, but also understand that we push out and, go out to vote in not only your local, but also state and federal like elections, I think it's going to be a huge part of how we are able to drive policies, as well as, the policies that interact with our day-to-day lives, right? Other than that, just how I was talking about the Trans Day of Visibility, we had a community event here in Austin, where I'm based, where we were able to, have a day of rest, of celebration, and of connection. I think one of the hugest things that are, is impacting not only the trans community, right, which is, more disposed to different forms of, social health determinants that leave us vulnerable to, different, disabilities or different barriers that hold us back from getting in touch with one another. But COVID has definitely held us back from being able to give physical care to one another. And so we had a community event where we were able to sit down, talk, eat, and then with the, Trans Day of Visibility rally, it prepared us, but also supported us in terms of knowing that we are not alone, right? I think that's a huge part of the work that we're doing now.
Yeah, Can I stop you there? I wanted to ask you to expand on that community care. I've got that in my notes in a couple of places. What did that actually look like? You know, sitting down and breaking bread with people. How did that come about?
Yeah, I think a huge part, and I think, while I am on the younger side, but I have dedicated, almost a quarter of my life to it at this point, is the history around being able to bring in community members in times of need, right? I started my advocacy in HIV prevention, and there's a long history of our queer work here in the States being directly tied to finding chosen families, right? Finding community members in which they can take care of one another when, either an institution or their family leaves them behind. And so now we're at this place in which we're able to not only support each other, with material needs, but also emotionally, right?
Yeah.
As we're finding, that I think this generation and my generation, right? I identify as millennial, right? In between Gen Z and millennials, in which the speed of information is at such a velocity in which, we are talking about almost, 2.5 years where people do not necessarily have to participate in their sex assigned at birth, and they're able to, describe and explore their own identities, right? We have to think about how we are able to take care of ourselves so that down the line we are at a place that we can take care of others as well. And so community care and those types of activities and events that we hold, it's mainly understanding that joy and dancing is part of this work, right?
Yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's mainly what I'm talking about.
Okay. I was delighted to hear you use one of my new favorite terms, chosen family. Jerry Ann kind of celebrated that a little bit. You want to talk about that?
That's right. Jen, there's a younger, of course, you have to understand that practically everybody is younger than I am. But a younger trans woman that I have taken under my wing and attended her medical needs and things like that, sent me a Mother's Day card. And she expressed her love to me, and she said that I was her chosen mom, and I was touched by that. And she sent me flowers, and it's a first for me, but it was very affirming, very gratifying, and so I accepted the expressions of love, the love language, and validate her feelings towards me. Jen, listen, you mentioned voting as part of the strategies of TENT, and we have a gubernatorial election coming up, and on the one hand we've got an incumbent who is on the attack of trans kids and their families, and they've been on the attack of trans people in the past. And we have a candidate, Beto, who has actually spoken out about the attack on trans youth. This is just asking for an opinion. Should a candidate show all their cards, or should they play the cards to get them elected? Now, this is kind of a touchy subject, kind of technical, I guess. Should they just show the cards to get themselves elected and then roll up the sleeves? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I can speak to it in terms of several different things, right? And I do want to address that we are like an issues-based organization, right? We do have nonprofit status. And I think a huge part of that is if, our issue is making sure that gender gender expansive and gender diverse equity is achieved here in the state of Texas, we must understand that we are talking about voting for representatives, right? And I want to highlight that note: representatives of their constituents, right? And if their constituents, right, us being, one of the largest states with one of the largest, trans communities in the nation, is that we should be voting for what we believe can bring us towards a better future, right? And so I've been working in the Capitol for about a year now, right? Since our legislative sessions are every other year. I think one huge part of it is that when we're talking about and talking to representatives who are debating our dignity, right, and trying to find different ways to question our existence, we leaned into the fact that near the end of almost a 10-month-long battle through the year of 2021 is, in some ways, they're trying to legislate us to death. And so one huge part is that we are voting in terms of ensuring the longevity of our rights, as well as how we can exist in this state authentically, and more importantly, with an increasing level of wellness, right? I think our goal is that, and when we're talking about, trans lives in this state, is that we're advocating for folks to be able to live, healthy and thriving lives, not necessarily ones where they have to survive in fear, right? And the difference between survive and thrive, it's been talked about for longer than I've been existing, right? And so in terms of talking about voting, in terms of getting out the vote here in this upcoming election, it's mainly understanding that being politically active isn't just voting, but it's also understanding that there are ripple effects to who you vote for. And so as we were talking about voting here, I also want to say, my main responsibility at the Transgender Education Network of Texas is ensuring that these processes are in a way, in accessible language, right? I think that's a huge part of what we've been talking about for, the last 14 months, and specifically around voter suppression, is that we are talking about a battle around access and accessibility, right? All the way from being able to access, life-saving care through gender-affirming care, or that be reproductive care, right? And so, those two things are extremely, extremely important. And access to being able to vote for those things, is kind of the linchpin at the moment.
Jen, because of the direction and intensity of the political wind now blowing, there are families who are actively seeking other places to live, safe places where families can go and continue to provide medical care that their children desperately need. Where do you see this going?
That's a really good question. Being able to, sense where the wind is going, I would definitely say
My brother-in-law died suddenly, and now my sister and her kids have to sell their home. That's why I told my husband we could not put off getting life insurance any longer. An agent offered us a 10-year, $500,000 policy for nearly $50 a month. Then we called SelectQuote. SelectQuote found us identical coverage for only $19 a month, a savings of $369 a year.
Whether you need a $500,000 policy or a $5 million policy, SelectQuote could save you more than 50% on term life insurance.
For your free quote, go to SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. That's SelectQuote.com.
SelectQuote. We shop, you save. Full details on example policies at SelectQuote.com/commercials.
Going to be a marathon, as I mentioned earlier. However, we're talking about a lot of states being able to be, provide that political refuge, right, and legal refuge. And, being a person who, was born in this country and my parents being, refugees from Vietnam, I think, those words they have a very heavy meaning to them. But I think one thing we have to think about is that we're talking about levels of privilege in which people who have the ability as well as the privilege to leave the state, or even the resources to be able to seek gender affirming care from other states, is not true across the board. It's not true for every trans youth, and it's not true for every Texas family. So, one of my hugest concerns, and we're talking about gender affirming care overall and being able to talk about access to gender affirming care, is one, it's not that everybody wants to leave Texas. People have, generations of either history or every single part of their support system is here in the state. And if they leave that behind, they are, put in between a rock and a hard place already, right? Being trans here in the South, being, if they are queer, if they're disabled, if they're a person of color, and it looks completely different between any of those intersections of identities, right? And so we are talking about that's not necessarily a possibility for every family of a trans youth, nor is it possible for every person who identifies as trans in the state, or who, needs access to abortion care. It's not possible for every single person to leave these states. And I think that's why it's so important to be active and understand that, these things are important to fight. And it's not just fighting for ourselves, but also fighting for those who cannot.
I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, referencing your generation. You're kind of a tweener between millennial and Gen Z. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I'm a boomer. Jerry Ann, I don't even know what she is, but we're both. But then again, I am older than the town I live in. So
I'm a relic. and that will be clearly indicated at the display at the Smithsonian that they'll place me
in. Anyway, the reason I picked up on that is because you mentioned that things are moving faster. Yeah, but largely because of technology. And, I think it's fair to say that the millennials and certainly the Gen Z people are used to that. It is less stressful personally and culturally for that group than it is for my peers. Is that a fair statement?
I would definitely not put it in a sense that
well, yeah.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
You were talking. You mentioned, how things are moving faster, technology, culture, that kind of thing, and that it is, if I heard you right, a little bit easier for younger generations because they were born into it to that pace. Did I get that right?
Yeah, in a way, right? And I didn't necessarily that culture is necessarily moving any quicker than it is, right? It's the ability to access information, and at the same time, I would also say that there's on the other side of that coin is that there's also access to very, very fast information at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the work that I do. In my own advocacy as well as an organizer here in the city of Austin, is being able to dispel those.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And it's I'm engaged on a regular basis with the public at large and involved in online discussions and that kind of thing. And the amount of disinformation that's out there it's certainly distressing. I'm realistic about it. There's very little that can be done other than to cite credible sources and steer people toward the real information. But I'm finding even that's troublesome. People are pushing back against recognized authority just because they are, what's the term that Wright loves to use? The intellectual elite. Yeah, how do you argue against somebody who believes that you're lying to them just because you're smart?
Oh, wow. That's a question. That's definitely a question.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but yeah, if you got something to say, feel free. But it was kind of a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I would definitely not say I identify as an intellectual elite at all. I definitely know that there are folks out here that have expertise in even the work that I do. But, I think a huge part of how we are able to, lean into, the information age, if it may be called that, is that, we are experts of ourselves. I would definitely say that, that's a huge part of, being queer, being trans for me, is that I know exactly who I am and who I want to be. As well as, what wellness is defined for and to myself. And so, when we're talking about the ability to, dictate and also understand and have that agency over our own bodies is a huge, huge part of many of the battles that myself and many of my colleagues are finding ourselves in.
Yep, it's hard to argue against one of us just saying, well, this is true for me. Not impossible, but yeah, I think that you made a very, very good point, is we are the experts of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, how can people help Tent? How can they support you and the cause of Tent?
For sure. I would definitely say, a few things about how you're able to support us, right? First off, being and understanding that we do not have to leave this state. We should not have to leave this state, right? I call this place home, as many of our, trans and queer siblings do as well. So, understanding that is going to be extremely important, especially as I see, a lot of my community members being told to leave Texas, being told to leave the South. And, being able to understand the form of the deep connection that we have of being, in where we call home.
Are you talking about people being told to leave because we don't want you here, or because they're being told to leave for their own well-being?
Right. So what I'm mainly addressing is that even my own community members, trans community members that don't live in Texas are telling, my community members here in Texas to leave for their own well-being. And, we should not have to leave. I want that to be clear. Nor does the ability for a trans youth, also, hearing the same thing is not necessarily the best thing to say to a trans youth when they need our support.
Absolutely. It's just, well, Jerry and I were talking about this just before we started up the podcast today, about the tragedy of the polarization. It doesn't seem to be getting any better. It's getting worse. And when it looks like the only solution is to move to California, that's terrible. To uprooting people from their home, their family, their support systems, and everything else.
Yeah, and we're talking about folks being asked to leave. If it's not California, where else do they have to go? There's we're talking about anti-trans legislation being filed, or even being signed off and being put into practice all across the nation. So where do they go outside of the very few states that do have protections for our community members? But yes, back to the original question, right? How else do you help? How else do you support trans lives here in the state of Texas? Is one, you can definitely stay involved, stay informed. You can either do that by following us over at TENT or the Transgender Education Network of Texas. We're at Trans Texas everywhere. So that's, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. But if, social media isn't necessarily your speed, staying informed and keeping your community around you close to you and active and informed, right? As I mentioned earlier, what that might look like for some who have the privilege to be able to vote is by voting. And so I think those are some of the biggest things, but honestly, show up and show out. Right now, we are looking at, we have a fundraiser at the end of the month to raise funds for families of trans youth who might need a little bit of extra resources to be able to seek gender affirming care out of state, legal, being able to pay legal fees, or if they want to, have the ability to find safety elsewhere.
Details on that fundraiser available on Tent's website?
Yeah, it's going to be out in Houston on the 28th at Axelrod. It's going to be a ticketed event just to, ensure that we are able to raise funds, but also to be able to, make sure that we're able to pay for some fun activities for all ages there.
Repeat that hashtag one more time. I want to make sure I get that right so we can put that in the episode notes.
Yeah, our social media is at TransTexas.
At TransTexas. Okay. I think Jerry Ann's got another question for you.
Promotion. Kelly mentioned, both of you discussed California a while ago. And speaking of California, next month...
I was wondering how she was going to get this in there.
Next month, a documentary film will be shown in California at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. The date is June 18th. The time is 12:30 p.m. And tickets went on sale yesterday to watch this documentary film. The film was filmed here in the Houston area, and it is the story of the 4 trans women and their transitions, primarily an attorney in the Houston area, Danielle Healy. And the title of the film is Our Dad, Danielle. It's a good film. It's won 4 awards already at film festivals in Vail, Portland, and Manchester, England. And this is the first in-person showing because of COVID in this country. So if you'll just kind of spread the word for that, June 18th, 12:30 p.m., Our Dad, Danielle.
The film festival that it's a part of out there is the Dances with Films Festival for independent film producers. Jen, how can Trans Truth help Tent carry out their mission? I mean, we talked about how well aligned we are, but is there anything we can do to help Tent?
For sure. I would definitely say, one of the best ways that we're asking community, but also I guess I'm asking you, is to be able to share out this information. We're talking about the misinformation being spread across Texas. That also includes about the news or the implications of any of the court cases that we're embroiled in right now, right? Is that making sure that folks know that they're supported. And, as we're going through the next few months, the next few years, whatever that might look like, is being able to support yourselves as well. That you're cared for and loved for, even here in in Texas.
Jen, if you have an event, would you contact Trans Truth, contact Kelly? We would like to attend if at all possible and support you. And there's always possibility we can do a remote podcast from an event, and we would love to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to explore the different types of opportunities that we can get you all out to. Excellent.
Jen, we've taken up, looks like, a little over a half hour of your time. Thank you so much for being here and talking with us on this, these so very important topics.
Yeah, no, thank you all for having me. This has been, really good to be able to sit down and just talk about the work as opposed to staring at my computer screen and going from Zoom call to Zoom call. This was very, very.
I was just going to say, you're probably just dying to get back on Zoom calls. I know it's going to be a busy few days for you.
Yeah, and thank you for having me, and thank you for doing what y'all do too, and spreading the good word. And the good
Jen, thank you for what you do.
All right, we'll be in touch and probably see you at that fundraiser.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Yeah. I will not be there, but the rest of my team will be able to hold it down and hashtag protect trans kids. Right. All right. Yeah.
Okay.
Take care.
Jim, thanks again. Have a good weekend. Okay. Next on the agenda, actually, it was first on the agenda as it would. We did introduce it as a breaking news item at the top of the show, but we're going to go ahead and revisit it here, and that is the recent, as in today, action by the Texas State Supreme Court putting a stop to the injunction against the State Department of Family and Protective Services investigating parents who are seeking gender-affirming health care for their trans children. It's a little bit complicated, but it's both good news and bad news. The bad news is that the injunction has been lifted on anyone who is not a party to the lawsuits that are already being filed. The good news is that the injunction remains in place for those cases that were being investigated and which are the subject of ongoing legal action as brought by the ACLU and Lambda Legal. Also good news is the fact that the state Supreme Court stated explicitly that the non-binding action made by Governor Abbott is just that, non-binding. So it certainly remains to be seen how that will play out, but it is good news.
Kelly, before we begin today's podcast, you and I were briefing the main points of the podcast, and we talked about what drives this move. I call it what propels the political wind against trans kids and against trans people in general. And you made a very good point. You said that the case against trans health care from the right-wing conservatives is based on bad science and websites with no credibility.
Yeah, exactly. One of the legislators in Alabama who was so proud of the law they got passed there, making it a felony to provide health care to trans kids, refers to the law as just common sense. Well, as is so often the case, common sense is, neither common nor sensical. But in this case, it flies right in the face of every expert opinion on what transgender kids need in the way of health care.
Speaking of nonsense, in reference to this decision, Ken Paxton said that this was a win against the gender ideology of doctors.
Yeah, win for families against the gender ideology.
What is a gender ideology?
Let's break that down. I mean, we all know what gender means, or we all think we know what gender means. The common sense understanding of gender is that it's the same as sex. Those a little more informed on the matter know there's a difference between sex and gender, but we know that Paxton can't see that. Okay. Ideology is what? A set of beliefs, an adopted doctrine?
Yeah, the way I understand it, ideology is a belief system, and traditionally spoken of as a political position or a political or a way of thinking that results in a person's politics. Aristotle, in his book Politics, said that man is a political animal, that they congregate in policias where they establish policies that are enforced by police. So almost every human being has some sort of politics, which is their ideology.
So, gender ideology of doctors. Clearly, A.G. Paxton sees that as a bad thing and sees it coming from doctors. Reading between the lines there, I see those know-it-all doctors, the smart people who think they know everything.
Well, here's a crazy way to look at it. If there's attack on trans people, it's obvious. In the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years, there's been lots of attempted legislation against trans people. It seems to be a war. People are thinking about leaving the state because of the political climate and because of legislation. But what's crazy is if that is fueled by a particular ideology, and the right wing believes that there's a gender ideology, then it appears to me that they're dodging bullets that aren't even flying.
Depends on the circumstances, but let's face it, there's no threat from trans people. But as we've talked about in previous episodes, transphobia is a big problem. It stems almost entirely from ignorance and the fear that is a natural consequence of not understanding something. It's easy to see it as a threat, which is why we're here, to inform people and let them learn the truth about trans people and trans kids.
Let me put it in simpler terms. There's nothing to be afraid of. I'm not going to hurt you. I don't think you're going to hurt anybody either, Kelly.
Right, of course. Before we go, I want to make sure that we mentioned again the fundraiser coming up here in Houston on May 28th that Jen was telling us about. This is the Show Up and Out for Trans Youth in Texas event. It is a ticketed event. You can find out about it on the Trans Truth website. I'm sorry, the Trans Truth episode notes for this episode. It will be held from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Axelrad Ice House on Alabama, 1517 Alabama. You want to get your tickets ahead of time. And again, we'll have a link to the Eventbrite page for that event. We look forward to seeing you there. With any luck at all, we'll actually be there doing a remote.
And don't forget the documentary film, Our Dad Danielle. Tickets are now on sale for the showing next month. You can buy online tickets for virtual showings. You can also go to Los Angeles and walk in and see it in person. But just go to ourdaddanielle.com for details.
All right. Well, I think that about covers it for this episode of Trans Truth. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will talk to you again soon.
I think it's for virtual showings, yes.